Welcome to Transformative Principle, where I help you stop putting out fires and start leading. I'm your host, Jethro Jones. You can follow me on Twitter at Jethro Jones. Welcome to Transformative Principle. I am excited to have Casciotta on the program. CJ is a creative strategist and award-winning media producer. He is the author of the book Get Weird, Discover the Surprising Secret to Making a Difference. And his new book, The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary, just came out this year. So definitely check that out. CJ, welcome to Transformative Principle. I'm happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Jethro. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so this is part of the Summer of AI series where we're talking about artificial intelligence. Thankful
It is
to
the
our
summer of AI, by the way, isn't it?
it sure is.
It really is. I can't go on LinkedIn without any post mentioning AI and what I should do about it.
It's impossible, and you're not using it right. And if you just follow my 10 steps, then
Right.
you'll know how to do it. So
Yeah.
it's pretty crazy. So appreciate you being here. This was a good conversation about the idea of understanding who we really are and not forgetting that despite all these technological advancements, all these tools that we have. And I appreciate that conversation. What do you think people should look forward to from our conversation today?
I think people should look forward to some really, really big ideas and sort of pushing the boundaries of what could be possible. I think I'll put a big giant asterisk on, a lot of our conversation is about reforms that could happen, changes that could be made. And I know we're talking to educators who are like, hey, I'm just trying to get through the day. I'm just trying to get through the week. And so when you hear this conversation, know that we are talking about dismantling huge, huge systems, not things that you need to take on and shoulder necessarily, but hopefully things that you could get excited about and at least know that other people who are thinking about education, who are thinking about the future, who are thinking about students and kids and the next generation are also hoping for and wanting and having conversations about.
Yeah, and people who have been listening to my podcast know that this is a path I often take.
Yeah.
So this will not be too much of a surprise. I've said many times that the one thing that the pandemic really taught us was that everything in school is made up and none of it matters. And that is really the case. And what we're talking about today is the stuff that does matter. And it is the only thing, in my opinion, worth teaching our youth. And so I'm excited for people to hear our perspectives on that. Even though we didn't say those specific phrases in the podcast, that's really what I believe in, and this is all that really matters. Pretty much nothing else does. So we'll get to this interview with CJ in just a moment. Thanks, CJ. We'll talk to you in a sec. All right, CJ, let's talk about, you've got this book out called The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary and talks about humanity. What does it mean to maintain our humanity? What does humanity even mean?
Maintaining humanity means to practice the forgotten art of being ordinary. So I was talking to this researcher who does all of this generational research on anybody from millennials to Gen X to boomers, Gen Z, and she was talking to a bunch of Gen Z kids, and she said the scariest thing in all of her conversations was how every kid who didn't even know each other, she was talking to kids from all around the country, they all thought that in order to be a complete and successful human, they also had to be a personal brand as well. So she was telling me, man, humans and brands, the fact that we have to be both of these things, and that's something that kids today are just being born into. That is such a massive cultural shift that we need to pay attention to. And so that one conversation really was the spark to write this new book, The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary. We need to be okay with being these messy, complex meat machines that we were born with, hands down, period. We don't have to be personal brands. We don't have to elevate or project or Photoshop ourselves. If we can have reverence for the base model, how we come out, that's what it means to maintain our humanity in a world that is increasingly becoming automated.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to that. This reverence for the base model. I love that phrase because that's what we all are. We are the base model. We're not, some people may have, special things that make them look more special. Like I just watched the movie Air about Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is a
Yeah.
special guy. But deep down inside, he's really just the base model as well, right?
Yeah.
And he's constantly working and competing and striving to be his best, and that's what makes him elevate. But you don't have to be that to have a fulfilling life, right?
Exactly. Right. And it's we're never going to put the genie back in the bottle, right? I'm not a Luddite. I'm not saying let's just all, do away with technology and media and all of that stuff. But if we don't move forward with a collective understanding of what it means to be human and all of all the reverence and credibility that comes with, we're going to continue to steer in a direction where the technology we create owns us versus us having control of it.
Yeah. And I think this is so powerful as we're talking about AI so much this summer, and the things that one of the questions that I keep asking is, are we training the models or are the models training us?
Exactly.
And we've certainly seen that in some regards social media has certainly trained us to act certain ways and to behave in certain ways, and there's some really fascinating ideas about what that looks like and whether or not that's good or bad. And that everybody can make their own decision about that. But overall, like nobody, hardly anybody is satisfied with who they are, right? And
Right.
so how do we help people be satisfied with that base model that they are?
Right. And again, that doesn't mean that you don't aspire to be something better, greater, to improve yourself, but it does mean having a baseline for uh, dignity and
Yeah.
human worth that is unbelievably important, and is becoming more and more important as we are seeing all these sort of kayfabe, if to borrow a term from pro wrestling, where it's like people, the general audience sort of thinks you're being real, but you're really pretending, but they're not in on that whole narrative. Like, as that continues to come with an increase in the ubiquity of media technology, human worth, human dignity, having a baseline value and a collective sort of understanding and agreement on what that is going to become more and more important.
Yeah. And we have to have this understanding that no matter where we're at, we are worthy of love, of admiration, of acceptance, of being involved to the level that we want to be. And I'm in this coaching program where it's for men specifically, and that's really what they get to, is that you are worthy as you are. And and here's the powerful thing, and you still should still strive to be your personal best, whatever that looks like. And
Right.
being worthy or reverence for the base model doesn't sound like you're satisfied with being sucky. It sounds like you're satisfied with where you're at. Can you dive into that distinction a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Marshall McLuhan would say technology actually does end up training us. You cannot get away from it. And so, again, understanding that that is going to happen regardless of what we think, having conversations about how we want technology to train us, what we need to do to intentionally sort of put guardrails on the elements that we have, the features that we come with in the base model, right? Make sure those don't go away. Those are the conversations that I want us to have as a community, as a society, as parents, as caregivers, as educators. Look, things are not going to slow down, but can we have a collective understanding of the dignity it means to be human first before we create the next thing, before we let it sort of into the hands of a privately owned company? These are the questions that I think we need to be asking.
Yeah, how do we do that? And I mean, we're talking to school leaders here. So how do we do
Yeah.
that in a school when there's all this technology around, there's all this stuff and all these things that we need to do? How do we do that?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think one, we have lost the ability to imagine in our Western culture. I think it's a big statement, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. We've lost the ability to imagine apart from the topics of entertainment and convenience, right? We're really good in the United States at innovating new and interesting ways to stay entertained or to make life more comfortable or convenient. What we're not so great at, or what we've sort of lost the will to do, is have an imagination for education, for housing, for energy, the areas that would benefit ordinary people the very most. And so I think one of the reasons that you see so much drama and so much polarization just around public education right now in general is because we don't have a collective 30,000-foot understanding of what a profile of a graduate looks like in the United States, in a culture that is continually becoming automated. If we can start using our imagination for that purpose over, hey, let's just come out with a new app that makes life a little bit more convenient. Hey, let's come out with a new streaming service that sticks us in front of screens just a little bit more. I think we'll start to see that sort of coincides with this reverence for the ordinary. And so I know that's a really big ask, and it's very generalized, but as educators, if we can start implementing that imagination in students, one, that would be great. That's a great long-term solution. And a short-term solution is, let's actually reverse engineer what we want our students to learn based on who we want them to be, 18, 19, 20 years from now.
Yeah, that's a great goal, CJ, and something that I think a lot of educators want to have happen. And the challenge becomes, how do we know what we want that person to look like when we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know, like, so much of our education is focused on how do we prepare them for jobs in the
Right.
future. So how do you address that?
Well, I think we are starting to see the through lines of what the world's going to look like in the next decade or two. And the reason I wrote the book is because all of that is happening in the private sector. We're leaving it to Facebook and Twitter, or X now. We're leaving it to privately held or public, companies to really dictate all of that for us. And yet we are not being smart as governments, as communities, as educators. I'm not saying educators personally aren't smart. I'm talking about the highest level systematically. We are not getting ahead of where guys like Elon and Zuckerberg and fill in the blank and Bezos, they already know where we're going. They've already got the game plan based on not only the data, but insights, and like they have a pretty good understanding of where this thing is going. And we're still sort of catching up, going, oh man, did you know like a lot of teenage girls are committing suicide over Instagram? I wonder why that is. Well, the data is not conclusive yet, so let's run a couple more tests. We're behind the eight ball. We need to get in front of the eight ball.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating idea, that this is something that I've thought a lot about as well, that when social media came out, we in education, we just let the social media companies do whatever they wanted. Not like we had any control over them,
Right.
but we just went along for the ride. And with artificial intelligence, especially, what I've been saying to educators is we need to have a voice and a seat at the table. And the way we do that is with what we use. And if we're going to use tools that reject our humanity or don't recognize our desire for privacy or whatever the case may be, then these tech companies are just going to continue doing whatever it is that they want to do. And our attention and our money drives what they do. They're not going to continue working on something that does not make them money. I mean,
Right.
that's the long and short of it. They're not going to continue creating something that people don't use. And so if we can then get on the other side of that and say, here's what we value and this is what we want,
Right.
we can influence things by saying, we're not going to use that because it doesn't do these things. Is that too big of an idea that's not really realistic to get that many people on board?
No, I think it is the idea. I think we need a recalibration of some basic human values for the 21st century. In the book, I call them the 9 beatitudes of media technology. I don't care what they're called,
Yeah.
but we're talking. I'm thinking big because the stakes are so high. Like ChatGPT just came out, and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, I think this is going to change everything forever." Everything's being exponentially accelerated at a rate that we just cannot handle. So I'm going to talk big because the stakes are really, really big. We need another moving, elastic sort of document that allows us to go, okay, let's point back to these are the essential things we value as as humans. The fact that there's so little about media and technology in the United States Constitution, it's just staggering to me with how much it runs our day-to-day lives as a society. I mean, we're not talking about, I talk about in the book how you can kind of overlay a lot of these same big cultural issues throughout history onto what's happening with media technology right now. Like you got big tobacco in the 60s where they were like, well, let's just sort of like wait till the data is conclusive. Then you got climate change. Well, let's just wait till the data is conclusive. You're seeing the same exact conversations happening around social media, around the metaverse, around AI. And if we're not careful, we're just going to repeat history. However, the bigger issue is that smoking, okay, that's part of your body. That's whatever that's physical. Like, I mentioned concussions too. Again, that's physical. That doesn't affect every single human being. And then what was the other one? Climate change. Well, that affects everybody pretty equally. So, but what I'm saying about media technology and really the lack of discussion and regulation around that in particular is that this is kind of like everything. Like we're doing media technology right now. It's the way we transmit information, ideas, communication with each other. It's everything. And the fact that we don't have a better grasp on how to navigate it, how to use your terminology, how to train it versus have it train us, or the creators train us. It's scary to me, and yet I remain hopeful because I think people are waking up right now to the reality that time is definitely of the essence, and we're already, again, like I said, behind the eight ball. We need to play some catch up.
Yeah. And it seems daunting to play catch up. I have another podcast called Cyber Traps,
Yeah,
which talks about a lot of this stuff as well. And there are very real issues that we're facing that we really don't know how to solve. And I love your idea of going back to having a reverence for the base layer and understanding who we really are and recognizing that that person is worthy. Can you talk to us about a collective journey and what that means and help us understand how that ties into it?
sure. This is Jeff Gomez's idea. Really brilliant guy behind the scenes in the entertainment industry. But if you look at the way narratives are shifting in entertainment and pop culture, for what, millions of years we've relied on this basic narrative, this basic modality called the hero's journey, where there's one individual, usually it's a male, usually they're bringing fire back to the community, they're having to overcome some perilous circumstance and probably murder, kill, or at least banish an evil villain. the problem with that narrative, as ingrained into us as it is that what happens when everybody all of a sudden has the ability to be their own hero, to tell their own stories? We need a new modality. And so that's where collective journey comes in. If you've seen shows like Ted Lasso, the movie Barbie, and Kanto, collective journey stories, they don't have a hero. They have conductors. They have people who are sort of these main characters who sort of lead and allow for the community to sort of band together and tackle a problem. But that community, that team, that ensemble is doing just that. They're tackling a problem. They're fighting against an outdated system that needs to be dismantled and reconciled. They're not going after a particular villain. If there are people who are perpetuating that system, if they are acting in a way that goes against what the community wants, they can be reconciled. They're not banished. They're not killed. They're invited into a new system. And that becomes sort of a meta example of the way we need to lead our society right now in a world where everybody's got these little storytelling devices. And so, one of your questions was, okay, how do we maintain that humanity in an education system where it's like, okay, well, we got to use these tools. Like, we can't just, act like they're not there. And even if we do, kids are actually going to be bringing them into the classroom. By the way, they're going to be using them for jobs in 20 years as it is. So we can't, it's another reason why we can't just act like and pretend that they're not there. What we can do, though, is teach them to use the little storytelling devices in their pocket, or the storytelling devices that are available to them online or in the metaverse, to tell collective journey stories, to tell stories that band us together, that help create a better community, versus just perpetuate that hero's journey where only one person can triumph. And in order for that person to triumph, somebody else has to disappear.
Yeah, you're causing me to do some deep thought here, and I think that's really great. I want to address that issue that you just spoke about the hero's journey, where someone has to be the villain, and I think that that's the key to what I'm thinking about right now, because we do want people to be the hero of their own lives, and to be able to overcome the challenges that they face. And I don't want to lose that, but I also like what you're saying about how you don't have to have a person be the villain. And
Hmm.
in Ted Lasso, for example, um, the villain in that story is not an individual person, even
Exactly.
though they created a villain in the third season with Nate, which I don't think they needed to do,
Yeah.
because the challenges that everybody was facing were enough of a villain already. I really like that approach. I haven't seen Barbie yet, but in Encanto, the villain ended up being the grandma, but was really this lack of belief in who
Right.
you are, and this lack of love of yourself that we were talking about before. And so talk a little bit about how in this collective journey, this idea of the people who are quote unquote bad actors, how do we help and support them as opposed to the hero's journey?
Well, to talk about the grandma in Kanto, she's not necessarily a villain. She just is still believing in an old framework, in
Yeah.
an old system. And the role of the collective is to help that person reconcile that old system with a new system. So again, they're not villains or bad actors in collective journey modality. They're not banished, but they are reconciled. And so that's a really interesting meta conversation we can be having, because again, we have all these little storytelling machines. Students are already they're already telling stories. They always want to, but are we going to encourage them, or just sort of let them use all these storytelling machines to become personal brands, to become farther disconnected from their ordinary human selves and become something that's larger than life but not necessarily real? Or are we going to educate them to use these little pocket devices, these little storytelling machines that they have at their fingertips, to help bad actors or help people who are perpetuating false systems, old systems, understand that there is another way, that there is a new system, to be reconciled to a new way of of community? That to me are the kinds of stories that are the most beautifully told. They're stories that are usually slow. They're not made in a TikTok sort of moment of, let me just do this in 90 seconds and talk really fast. They usually start with empathy, interviewing other people, unlike you, speaking to the person who is perpetuating that system versus banishing them, right? They're carefully sort of edited, not in a way where you're taking stuff out that you don't like, but you're really being thoughtful about what pieces you're putting in sequence and when and how. These are the kinds of stories I think we can help students tell, share, and most importantly, discover within themselves and their communities.
Yeah, the really challenging thing right now is that people who are perpetuating these old systems or are could be perceived as the villains in the story are excoriated right now and not certainly not redeemed or saved. They are banished even more than they may have
Right.
been in the past. That a
Right.
small mistake is magnified and made into a much bigger issue. People are, fired from jobs for something they did 20 years ago. And that's quite the opposite of what you're talking about. How do you address that?
Well, it goes back to the forgotten art of being ordinary, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to cancel an avatar. It's a lot easier to banish a flat 2D picture or a metaverse version, a social media version of someone. Proximity is going to matter all the more as we continue down this collective journey of the 21st century. Proximity, being in physical closeness to another person. It's very, very difficult to banish somebody, to cancel somebody completely when you're standing this far apart from them in real life. It's very difficult to hold a stance against them that, well, that kind of person is bad because X, Y, and Z, when you know their story intimately. And if you can't know their story in real life, in that proximity, again, we don't have to banish technology completely, but we can use the technology to help understand somebody intimately as we can, as intimately as we can in those confines. For example, it's really, really fun to start dunking on someone on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram when they make a mistake publicly. How often do we use that wonderful direct message feature that's there to say, hey, look, before I say this publicly, I just want to let you know that really hurt me, what you said. And here's why. You can actually have, it's becoming a very foreign concept to have a private conversation with somebody, whether that's using media technology or whether that's in person, whether it's actually getting, yeah, I can speak a lot more to that, but I think that's how we begin to curb some of that cancel culture that you were talking about by uh, forcing ourselves to see the ordinary human behind the avatar.
Yeah, I like that perspective a lot. And when we can see who someone really is, it makes it a lot more difficult to shun them and treat them as an outsider or as an
Yeah.
other. And yeah, I think that's really powerful. One things we didn't get to yet that I'd like to get to is the story of Jerry Springer. Tell us about that.
Well, I mentioned it early on because I talk about it a lot in the book. there's a pro. I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, and pro wrestling was a really, really big deal. And I'll explain in a minute. If you just stick with me, how pro wrestling has to do with Jerry Springer. But there was this thing in pro wrestling culture called kayfabe, where everybody internally understood that these were characters that were being played, but it was marketed to kids and very, very intentionally as, no, this is like a real sport. These people are real people. They're not actors. And what you've seen as media technology has become more and more ubiquitous is that you've got this sort of misunderstanding, or this lack of knowledge as to what is real and what isn't. So I talk about, I won't mention mention the name, but my daughter was she was looking at YouTube when she was in kindergarten. She saw this really famous sort of YouTuber, and I was kind of reflecting on when I was a kid. You know, actors played. It was very clear the lines, that the boundaries. Like Miley Cyrus played Hannah Montana, but for my kid who's now 10 years old, they see a really successful YouTuber who's like, oh, I have a mansion and I drive a BMW and all this, but their name is their name. They're not playing, so that boundary between fake and real, I would call that another version of kayfabe. And another example I found out about recently is Jerry Springer. This guy was actually a brilliant politician in the Cincinnati, Ohio area before he became this television persona, which again, the show was called Jerry Springer, but it wasn't really him. He was this really, really highly intelligent, intellectual guy who was a voice that I think America needed, certainly Cincinnati needed at the time, but he sort of left that for his career in the early stages of reality television. So he's really, really, huge on TV, and he decides, I think I'm so good at this, and I keep on giving these speeches whenever we come back home to Cincinnati, basically campaigning for other politicians. I kind of want to get back into this again. So they did a poll, and everybody was like, okay, we'd actually vote for this guy. He just would have to give up his online, or his it wasn't even online, his TV persona. And at that point, the guy couldn't get out of his contract. And so it was kind of a sad thing. It's like his personal brand that was sort of a version of kayfabe actually impeded him from being this genuine, ordinary, but incredibly hopeful, and I would argue necessary voice that his community needed. And so we're going to need people. My big point about kayfabe and pro wrestling and Jerry Springer is that we're going to need people who fight that lure of using media technology to create personal brands, characters, overhyped heroes, and instead use these tools to simply create better community, which again is the purpose of collective journey versus sticking to that hero's journey mentality.
Yeah, I think that's such a good illustration to close us out with, because it really exemplifies that his story specifically, he could have been a politician who made a difference, and was at one point, and then did his broadcast career after that, and could have had some really powerful things happen there.
Yeah.
Maybe not. We won't ever know. But instead, was, I guess, seduced by this idea of continuing the brand that he had, and for whatever reason couldn't feel like he could give it up and serve people in the way that maybe we'd say he should have. That was his more authentic person, right?
Hmm.
Is really what I interpreted from that. Am I off on that, CJ, or what do you think?
No, I mean, I think the story is a lot more. I kind of give you the cliff notes. It's more nuanced because there was a little bit of scandal in there and everything. But the point is, I think we all are coming to, both on an individual level and as a collective, communal level, as these tools are not showing any signs of going away. If anything, they're becoming more and more ubiquitous. we are all being faced with the choice of whether to embrace the reverence for our ordinary selves or playing into this trap that says we have to project this pretend sort of image because that's what the algorithm likes and that's what the algorithm appreciates and creates virality.
Well, CJ, this was great. I appreciate having you on. Once again, the book is called The Forgotten Art of Being Ordinary, and you can get that all over the place. Any other way you want people to connect with you or work or come find you?
No, I think honestly, going and buying the book, go to your local bookstore and ask for it, and that's a really really fantastic way of just showing support for ordinary humans in ordinary businesses. I write a Substack newsletter called the Fuse Letter, so it's there to spark creativity. You can go to CJCast, that's CJCAS.substack.com, and you can connect with me on a pretty weekly basis there as well.
Good. CJ, thanks so much for being part of Transformative Principal. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, Jethro, this was fun. Thank you.